Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Sunday, August 25th, 2024, and today I'm going to be talking to you about the state of Texas, a battleground state in the 2024 presidential election, a state that new polling from the University of Houston shows Kamala Harris within a very narrow gap between her and President Trump, who currently leads her by 5 points statewide. Now, this brand new poll from Texas certainly puts a huge change in the way that we view the Lone Star State. It's a state that in 2020 was actually decided by a very narrow amount in comparison to previous election years when Trump had won it in 2016 by 9 points and Mitt Romney had won the state by 16. Donald Trump only won in 2020 by just under 6 points. And so this 5.6% margin has been ringing in the backs of the minds of Democrats since this election, arguably even since the 2018 midterm elections, when Democrats came within 3 points of the Texas Senate race with then Representative Beto O'Rourke running against Senator Ted Cruz. The 2024 election really has been, for the most part, about defense for Democrats. Where can they defend their states that they won in the last election? The Democratic Party has spent $250 million in advertisement spending in states like Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Georgia, Arizona, and Nevada. 6 out of the 7 key battleground states that are the main focus of this election, the Democrats held and won back in 2020. Now, in 2024, Texas really hasn't been on the radar for most of the candidacy. And what we actually see here is that when it was Biden versus Trump, the same exact pollster taken just around a month and a half ago did their poll with YouGov showing Donald Trump leading Joe Biden by 9 points. Again, 2 months ago in the same exact state, the same exact poll firm, YouGov and the University of Houston Hobby School of Public Affairs, they do these polls in Texas, and they actually have a very strong track record. Just 3 weeks before the election in 2020, they predicted the margin of victory for Donald Trump would be 5.3%. That's what they found in their final poll. What ended up happening? Donald Trump won the state by 5.6%. Out of all of the polls back in 2020, the University of Houston ended up being the most accurate poll of the cycle. And today, months out, with time for growth for Kamala Harris, they show Donald Trump winning over Kamala Harris by a very similar margin, with it narrowing up slightly. And so this narrowing up of the race in the state of Texas goes to show that Kamala Harris, who has been largely seen as this electoral juggernaut in the Sun Belt, isn't just extending her reach to the battleground states of Arizona and North Carolina and Georgia and Nevada. It is extending well throughout the Sun Belt region. Hundreds of thousands of new people excited to volunteer across Georgia and Florida. Florida, a state the Democrats have entirely seemed to have written off, and very much have with Kamala Harris, but equally are now in recognition that the state's down-ballot races might go better for Democrats with Kamala Harris at the top of the ticket. Now, Texas runs in our first high-quality poll of the cycle with Kamala Harris as the contender for the Democratic nomination, winning that Democratic nomination and being polled against Trump in this state. The numbers here go to show that they are better for Kamala Harris by 5 points in Texas than they were under Biden, equally matching where Democrats were back in 2020 when they won the presidential election. This entire race for months on end also has been about how do we win coalitions, if we being the Democratic Party, how do we win coalitions that we won back in 2020 with minimal bleeding? The Republicans have been saying, how do we go ahead and approach this election and win over states that Joe Biden has experienced excessive bleeding? But Kamala Harris was far more than just a temporary solution, than just a band-aid to the wound that Democrats had. She has nearly entirely surgically patched this up, and we will see over the next 3 months exactly how powerful this candidacy is going to be. Because for weeks on end, since the candidacy announcement, Kamala Harris's numbers have increased steadily. From the announcement of her candidacy, she was up under a point. Today, she leads by 4. Should this trend line continue, by November, Kamala Harris will be leading by a very similar amount to where Biden was on Election Day in 2020, and that should be a terrifying thought for Republicans. Because what do we know in the difference from 2020? The polls have gotten better. They've actually started to underestimate Democrats in some battleground states. That's terrifying for the Republican Party. Because when you take a look at the states that Democrats are currently running to win in, let's take a look at a state like Pennsylvania, for instance. First one that came to mind. 19 electoral votes, huge state for the Democratic Party. They're up by 2. In 2022, they overestimated Republicans by 6 points on average in the polls in the 2022 cycle. If Kamala Harris is up by 2 and you were to extract that difference and apply it to this map, Kamala Harris would win by 8. Obviously not going to happen. That's not going to be the margin. But the reason I bring this up is because the polling firms have had time to figure out how do we get more accurate. How do we genuinely understand the electorate with, less bias, less leading of questions, a better understanding of the race as it is? These are numbers and these are helpful things that we look at for the Electoral College and predicting it. And the numbers have started to get better. Another thing I would take a look at too is a state like Wisconsin, where Kamala Harris leads by 4. Wisconsin has had a history of overestimating Republicans, but back in 2022, that all changed when it underestimated Democrats. The governor's race was supposed to go to Republicans by a point or 2. Democrats ended up winning it by 4. The Senate race was supposed to go to the Republicans by 5-6 points. Democrats ended up just under a point in a loss in that Senate race. States like Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, we saw consistency in underestimation for Democrats, and we also saw it in Michigan. Now, this isn't me trying to say that the polls are underestimating Kamala Harris. I just don't think they're underestimating Donald Trump the way they did back in 2020 and 2016. In a day and age where I would think that Trump supporters are the most comfortable saying they are voting for Trump to pollsters, to national news media, to their friends and family, it is this year and this year alone. After a mugshot that was released a year ago today, after the guilty verdict that was released months ago, after an assassination attempt that took place just over a month ago, this year has been the year for Donald Trump for all purposes. His opposition, Joe Biden, dropped out of the race. But what I don't think the Republican Party really expected to see was this surge in support for Kamala Harris, because what we have been seeing for years now in anticipation of a rematch, and Nikki Haley said it best, and I'm not here to just quote that to be funny. I genuinely mean it when I say this. When Nikki Haley said, whichever side of the aisle gets rid of their 80-year-old candidate wins the election, I think that rings true. And Democrats were given a phenomenal opportunity to do so. Did so masterfully after the RNC. Millions of dollars wasted on Joe Biden rhetoric. You know, Donald Trump and his Republican colleagues at the RNC, Joe Biden's name was mentioned almost the equivalent amount as Donald Trump. Kamala Harris didn't even rake in the top 10 words. Kamala or Harris, neither of the two. New York Times did an analysis on this because the RNC was held in the day and age that Biden was the nominee. The day after it ended, guess what? Democrats dropped out of the race. Joe Biden dropped out of the race. Kamala Harris stepped in. And again, this Sun Belt strength that we knew existed, but we did not see it fully displayed on the national level because the hypothetical polls were not at all indicative of what they would actually show in the actual election. Kamala Harris isn't just putting the Sun Belt states back in play. She's putting Texas even closer than it was in the 2020 election. And the most accurate pollster, again, the same exact firm that just a month and a half ago had Biden down 9, now has Harris down 5. The trajectory and the trend is beneficial for Democrats, especially in those down ballot races. Because when Biden was on the ballot, Ted Cruz was beating Colin Elrod more than he is now. And now it is a 2-point race because Ted Cruz is so unpopular, Colin Elrod is largely popular, and Kamala Harris is that driving motivational factor that brings Democrats closer to victory regardless of where they are. And so when you take a look, Trump plus 5 translates to Cruz plus 2. In the battleground House districts, this will help Democrats too. But at large, Texas indicates really good results for Kamala Harris in the general election. Because again, if Democrats just want to win, because right now my map says they win by less than they did in 2020, but these Texas numbers are arguing they might even do better than they did in 2020. This is a very real possibility, and we start to see this level of support for Democrats across these states. Should the polls be right, yes, Democrats will likely do better than they did in 2020. Why? Because the polls have them up in North Carolina right now, which is a very interesting position to be in because just a year ago, we were talking about how, and not even a year ago, rather, a month ago, when Joe Biden was in the race, we were talking about how North Carolina was a 5, 6, 7-point race for Donald Trump. You can see that against Biden, Trump was leading constantly. We can see before Trump. You did not find a singular poll that had Biden in the advantage. I mean, take a look at this. Keep going. Keep scrolling. We can go back months and months and months. We will not find ourselves up until this point, February, which was a poll against Nikki Haley. Even then, Trump was maintaining his lead. I'm going to keep looking because I'm looking for one right here. November 1st through 5th of 2023 was the last time Biden had an advantage. 1 point. Since then, Trump train, almost as if it's Joe Biden's Amtrak. And by the time we get to Kamala Harris becoming the nominee and time to consider her as the Democratic contender, the numbers flip immediately. Cook Political Report drops the first poll of the cycle that shows Kamala Harris up. Then Redfield Wilton Strategy said, okay, wait, Trump's up. Trafalgar came in as the Republican, cozy up firm, Trump's up. But then it started to tie. Then the A-plus poll New York Times Siena College had Harris was up. Then we started to see more data points. Focal data had Harris up. Survey USA, A-plus pollster, High Point University, really strong pollster in North Carolina, have Harris up. And now the average in the recent polls, Harris leads by 0.2%. Texas is an indicator of a larger movement on the nation, but Texas itself, with its 40 electoral votes, is exactly where Democrats want it to be. And because here's the thing about Texas. I think this also isn't just bad news for this cycle. What you have come to understand, hopefully, from this point is that this is not good news for the Republican Party now, but this is terrible news for the future. The trajectory of Texas over the past 8 years has been such a substantial shift, it genuinely is incomprehensible. When you take a look at the shift from 2012 just to 2020, in 8 years' time, a whole bunch of red. A lot of states shifted to the right. For instance, states that Republicans now feel way more confident in. States like Ohio, Trump expanded that margin by 11 points. Iowa by 14 points. But these states don't have many electoral votes. Ohio now has 17. Iowa still maintains itself at 6. Even Florida only shifted by roughly 4 points since the 2012 cycle. These larger states, though, and what we find to be the best case for Democrats, is that Texas of all states, the ruby red Texas state, safe red routinely until recently, shifted towards Democrats by 10 in just under 8 years. That is a point a year. And if that trend line was to continue, again, not saying it will, but if it was to continue, the shift is substantial enough that by 2024, Kamala Harris could lose Texas, not going to win it, but lose Texas by just 2 points, which means in 2024, it is so far in play that Democrats will likely spend $200 million in the state. Because the electoral strength of Texas should not be underestimated. If Democrats were to win Texas, let's say for the sake of just simple prediction analysis, I'm not saying it's going to happen, Texas goes blue, Kamala Harris would win 327 electoral votes as of right now. But it means there's a lot of room to fall for Democrats. Let's say Arizona goes, Nevada goes, Pennsylvania goes, Michigan goes. If Democrats hold on to Wisconsin, they win the election. But here's the thing. If they get Nevada, all the Hillary Clinton states from 2016, plus Texas, they win the election. It's a map here that is a nightmare scenario for Republicans because Texas being added into the fray. And if it's anything like what we've known from Georgia and Arizona is that these states, when they turn blue once, could very well stay blue in the next upcoming elections and could be on that verge of flipping back and forth. But Republicans don't want that because Texas has for a long time been their California. They're populous states that they could gerrymander and crack and take advantage of to win routinely. And both parties do gerrymander. I'm not going to try to say this is solely a Republican thing. But for Texas, it has been. And so when you take Texas away, the Republican Party would be in a dire scenario. Because it's not as if Texas would go and Republicans easily win the Rust Belt, easily win Arizona, easily win Georgia, easily win North Carolina. That's not going to happen. If Texas is going, especially in this cycle, we're in for an electoral college huge victory for Kamala Harris. But the fact of the matter is, the narrowing of the numbers in Texas is indicative of a larger problem for Republicans, not for this election cycle only, but for generations to come. The narrowing up of the race is not a good position that Republicans should ever and have ever wanted to be in. But it's a reality. And with Kamala Harris on the ticket in just around 2 months, has shifted up the race 4 points to the left and made it so that Senate race is a bit more in play than they otherwise were hoping for. Because in 2018, Texas was a sleeper race. Ted Cruz didn't campaign as much and Beto O'Rourke was really in this race to win it, and Republicans did not expect them to come this close. They put all their efforts in 2020. But even then, they couldn't prevent the bleeding that was the suburban areas around Dallas and Houston and Austin that have turned on Republicans that used to be the most Republican stronghold states and parts of the state in 2012. The Rio Grande Valley and the entire southern border, we saw this entire region shifted towards the right tremendously. Joe Biden's collapse amongst Latino voters in Texas was so incredibly apparent. Take a look at some of these shifts. 40 points more Republican, 55 points more Republican, 39 points more Republican, 38 points more Republican, and yet the state itself shifted to the left by 4 points. If Democrats, Kamala Harris or anyone, was able to tap in to Hillary Clinton's support amongst Latino voters and Joe Biden's support among suburban voters, Texas is a narrow single-digit state. Not an 8-9 point state, not even a 5-6 point state like it was in 2020. You're talking 1, 2, 3 points. And the new data out of Texas, again from the most accurate pollster from 2020, tells us the race is even closer than it was in 2020, which is phenomenal news for the Democratic Party, Kamala Harris's campaign, and every Democrat up and down that ticket. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the top left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, then a playlist for my 2024 presidential election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.